Yeah. The joke I feel like I've heard before is that Father Time is undefeated. So he's never lost.
There's nothing to avoid. There's nothing you can avoid, or you can't get away from death and taxes. That's
Yeah.
it. Hello and welcome back to the Retire While You Work podcast. I'm Carson Odom, financial advisor here at Adams Wealth Partners, joined by Myles Zuger, another financial advisor here at Adams Wealth Partners. And we've got a beautiful summer day to dive into estate planning and some topics that are in estate planning are documents you're supposed to have, as well as some taxes that are associated with gifting and the estate tax, a few different topics that we can go into estate planning. I'll note that it took me a little while to get an estate plan done after having my first kid. I feel like that's kind of the trigger for everyone to get their estate plan done. Myles, do you have an estate plan?
I do not. I do not. I am one of those people who do not have an estate plan.
Doctors'
Um,
kids are the
but
sickest.
but I would add I don't have kids. And although important still, I don't have an overly complicated situation as it stands right now. And so without kids, I don't deem it as necessary. And I've just been sure with my wife and myself to make sure that on any investment accounts that we do have, the house, etc., any other personal belongings that have some sort of ownership tied to them, that the state would care about, that they're all beneficiaries and all that are correct in how we want them, which is kind of like I would say the base level of estate planning. So I guess you could say I have an estate plan in place.
That's true. That's a good point. That brings back to, in summary, what is estate planning? And I think it's just understanding the flow of assets were you to pass away, were something to happen to you, and it's protecting yourself and it's protecting your family, especially if you have kids. I think one of the most important factors for families to realize, especially if you have children, the extreme importance of an estate planning is protecting your children, not only from a financial perspective, but also dictating who is going to be the guardian of your children or something to happen to you. And you do not want to leave that up to the state to make that decision for you, whether or not they would make a good decision anyway. It's extremely important to make sure you are in control of that decision and putting it down on a document and getting it verified, making sure that those around you know where they can find that document. Extremely important that you're in control of that decision.
And I would add to that, I would add the state making a decision. Like, I mean, it's gonna be family that gets the kids, which probably greater than 50% of the time you're okay with, and that's what you would want anyways. But there are the circumstances where people, for whatever reason, maybe don't want family to be the ones to get their kids should something happen to them. Maybe they want it to be a good set of friends or somebody in the church or something like that. And so, it's not like the state's going to pick some random person that's going to get custody of your kids. It would be family, but not in all situations. That's not who, people want to have custody of their kid should something happen to them.
Exactly. Plus, if you have, history with your family, whether there's been a divorce in the past, it's just best to keep things as laid out as possible. And that goes beyond just guardianship of children. That goes in deeply into assets. If you have been divorced, or even if you haven't been divorced and you've got family assets or even assets of your own, it's extremely clear to define how assets are going to flow prior to something happening to you. And that is why it's extremely important, because you don't want there to be any question from people who are receiving the assets, any question on what your wishes were for how your assets should flow. Ultimately, you want to make sure that assets flow exactly how you wish them to, and also they're protected if they need to be protected. For example, if something happens to you and your assets are passed down to the next generation, but the next generation is 13 years old, you want to make sure that they are going to be protected from those assets until they have the maturity and responsibility level to manage them themselves. And that's where it comes to, it's important to pick proper trustees, executors of your estate, which we'll get into, and et cetera.
Yeah, and this is not just a one-time thing where you get the estate plan done and it's good to go forever. This is something that consistently needs to be reviewed and at least reviewed and checked on to make sure that what's in there is what you want or updated if something in there, things change over time. And so making sure that consistently from the day you put it in place till eventually, hopefully it's a long time away, but the day you do pass away, um, exactly what you want to happen is what happens, and that's done through reviewing and updating as necessary.
That's right. Part of the heavy lifting is truly just getting the estate plan done and making the meeting to go sit down and speak with an estate planning attorney. That's the hard part. You've already got the ball rolling at that point. And then from there, making a few decisions on your estate plan to go over a few of the terms. You can leave assets or something that happened to you almost in a marriage circumstance or something that happened to one spouse, almost always the assets are going to flow to the other spouse, or something that happened to both of you, assets are going to flow to children or other family members if you don't have any children. If there are people that you want to protect and put rules around those assets that are going to flow, assets would go into trust for those individuals. And you also have to determine a trustee of that trust. That is someone who is looking out over the finances inside of that trust for whoever the beneficiary is, a brother, sister, son, daughter, so on and so forth. And those are some of the biggest decisions you can make, because not only are you, if you have children, deciding who is going to care for my kids, but if there's money going into a trust, you've got to decide who's going to be the trustee of that trust and care for and look after the funds that are ultimately going to provide for your kids. So there are some important decisions, but also realize this is a what if circumstance. It's a what if something happens to me and my spouse, and we have kids behind. We're hopefully planning for stuff that's not going to happen for a very long time.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's a what if, hopefully in the short term, but a guarantee you could say which as financial advisors we can't use the word guarantee very often, but it's in the long run it's pretty much a guarantee that this estate plan will be needed. So we just hope that it's a long ways away for everybody.
I think we can say, I guarantee you're going to pass away. I think that
I
is
feel like
circumstance we can say.
Yeah, the joke I feel like I've heard before is that Father Time is undefeated, so he's never lost.
There's nothing to avoid. There's nothing you can avoid. Or you can't get away from death and taxes. That's it. That is it. So that was.
And I would just add quickly too. Some people maybe listening are wondering why financial advisors are talking about estate planning when we're not attorneys. We can't do the estate plan. I think in our practice, at least, we view estate planning as a crucial part to the overall financial plan because in the beginning there, Carson was talking a lot about finances and assets and who you leave them to and who you want them to go to. And so I think any good financial plan that you put together takes into account the estate plan because maybe there's tax consequences or other sorts of things that you need to account for. And so that's why we're talking about it with all clients we're working with. We're, always having the conversation of, do you have an estate plan? Have you reviewed it recently? Does it say exactly what you want it to say? Because they're so intertwined together that I think it's important that a good long-term financial plan has a good short-term and long-term estate plan that goes with it.
Fully agree. I think, so far in quick summary of what we discussed, does everyone need an estate plan? Largely, yes. I think, if you are, yes, I think if you have any sort of assets to your name or if you have children, yes, you need an estate plan because you're fully in control of what's going to be the flow of your assets, who's going to care for your children, and also powers of attorney. We're going to end up getting there, but you're deciding who has the power to look over you and your money if you're incapacitated or if something happens to you. Then you may ask, how often, once I get an estate plan, how often should I come back and visit it? I think it's great if, life is status quo, at least look at it every 5 years, because there may be, someone that you name that you're no longer close with that you want to change, or maybe you have additional children, which you can include language to allow for the addition of future children. However, I wouldn't review it every 5 years, because what if someone that you named passed away? You don't want to name someone, but then you usually name secondary tiers anyway. But I think every 5 years is great to do.
Yeah, I would say every 5 years at a minimum.
Yeah.
With the caveat to a couple things Carson said there. If somebody that you're close with that was in the plan passes away, or, you grow apart from somebody and you no longer want to leave them anything. Um, so I would say agree with Carson in 5 years, but also as big changes happen in your life that would cause the potential for an update to a plan.
I agree with that. Definitely. Um, and there's a couple different routes you can go, going down a rabbit hole here. One of the fundamental basics of an estate plan is called a last will and testament. That's essentially, or AKA in short, a will. And that's just listing out how finances, assets are going to flow. There's stuff listed in there about guardianship of children. If you have specific wishes with like a ring needs to be passed on to so-and-so, or your real estate, real property, different stuff like that. And a lot of questions end up coming out. Should I have a will or a living trust? And essential or a revocable living trust, RLT. And some people ask that question, and a revocable living trust is essentially putting assets into a trust. It's revocable. So you put assets into a trust while you're still living, you have control of that. And then you can also take them back out. But what it essentially is doing is it's avoiding the eventual probate. So eventually something were to happen to you, assets have to flow to the next generation. You open up probate in the state in which you live, and the courts essentially approve the flow of those assets. A trust can essentially bypass that. You put assets into it, then as soon as you have a death certificate for somebody, you can just administer the assets based on that. In our opinion, revocable living trust, well, everybody has a different opinion, but for us, it's not necessary, especially just for getting started. If you're just trying to get a base estate plan established, assets net worth gets up to $500,000, $1 million. I think it's probably pretty worth it to establish a revocable living trust. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I would generally agree with that.
There's no right or wrong.
Yeah, there's no right or wrong. I mean, yeah, I think I think the bigger the estate, the more it matters, obviously, especially because there's some privacy with it as well. It's a little bit easier to administrate. Court can get started right away. You can avoid probate with it. So yeah, and I think especially if there's maybe some relationships inside of a family that aren't so great, it really helps to protect against those sorts of things also, and leave no question or doubt as to what you want to happen with the assets, and nothing can really be challenged from that standpoint. So yeah, I would agree with that.
That's the point.
Yeah, I mean, I think, just the basics of what's in it. Some people might be like, what makes up a estate plan? Is it just a will? Is it power of attorneys, etc.? It really encapsulate it all. So it's a living will. It is a financial power of attorney. So, and usually durable, so that if you were incapacitated, somebody could make sure your bills were being paid and you weren't missing anything there, and everything was on the up and up. It's a durable power of attorney and a advanced healthcare directive. So if you are, and I think maybe that's the big thing, where somebody who's kind of in my situation, like we talked about at the beginning, no kids, pretty simple plan where it sits right now. But let's say I was in a car wreck and I'm incapacitated and chances aren't great of me coming out of that, then I think that's where it's important that my wishes, or your wishes, whoever it may be, are known. Like, do you want to be kept on life support? Do you not want to be kept on life support? Because if nobody has the answers to that question and you're laying in a hospital bed, it's a tough decision to make. If you're laying in a hospital bed and you specified that, hey, I do not want to be kept like this for the rest of my life, it's a lot easier decision for your family to make, because you've already made it for them, and they're not having to decide what to do or who's going to make that decision. It's the pull the plug question. I mean, to put it bluntly out there, your family's not having to make that decision. You've given them the grace of making that decision for them and not had to put them in that spot.
Regardless, still important to have those documents. Again, think to this
Yeah.
stuff. This is the less than 1% likelihood, event that may or may not happen. However, it's important just to make these decisions prior to, so nobody has to question or determine what would he or she have thought. What would Myles or Carson have wanted to do if they could tell us right now, even though they're incapacitated? So,
Yep.
There are different ways of getting wills and these attorneys and stuff established, and different states have different rules on notaries, witnesses, do-it-yourself signatures, and all that sort of stuff. If from our recommendation, use a professional. There's a lot of things that can be missed or skipped if you just go online. Using a professional when we're dealing with life-changing decisions, I think it's best to use a professional. If you need, an introduction to an estate planning attorney, we're happy to give one. We work with some great ones here in Nashville. But don't try to skip out. I don't think it's something that you should, skip out on.
Yeah, I think it's I would agree. I think you can go to one of the online resources, not going to say any names. You can go there and you can complete it all there. And yep, it's probably cheaper than going and seeing an attorney in person. But if a decision to spend a little bit more on the front end, I think can reap you the benefits of make sure it's done correctly and having it all in place and maybe down the road, if there is a mistake, saving your family a lot of money and a lot of headaches by making sure it's done by a professional.
And you establish a relationship. You end up having a relationship with an attorney that you work with that can help you, anytime if you need to make a change in 5 years, or if something does happen, you already have a relationship established for somebody to walk through probate or somebody's passing, the flow of assets, et cetera. So that's another benefit that comes with it. One of the things that I wanted to touch on was estate taxes and kind of how that flows. The big kind of misconceptions with estate planning also goes into taxes associated with an estate. And a lot of times people think that, well, here's something interesting. If you receive an inheritance, and I'm talking about Tennessee right now, it's different state by state, but if you receive an inheritance, the receiver has no tax associated. If somebody writes you a check for $1 million, you do not owe taxes on that. And the reason being is tax is associated with the estate that makes the gift. So for example, the current gift limit right now for 2024, I believe is $18,000 per person. So essentially I can write Myles a check for $18,000. There are no taxes associated with that. I can essentially give anyone $18,000 and I don't have to report it to the IRS. It is, and reporting it, what that means is every person has a lifetime gift exemption. Right now, as it sits, I can pass it down in my estate a little over, 13-14 million dollars with zero tax associated. So if I sit here and I decide tomorrow I'm going to write Myles a check for $200,000, fine, no biggie. I have to file.
I'd love that. That'd be great if you want to do that.
Sure, I'll think about it. I would have to file a gift tax return for 2024 showing that I gave Myles $200,000. Now, $200,000 less my annual exclusion amount of 18 grand is going to reduce my $13-14 million that I can give. So if it was 13 million and I have to reduce it by 200,000, all of a sudden I can only pass down or give $12.8 million. So the exemption amount is extremely, extremely high these days. And estate tax is not extremely important for a lot of people. It is important for some if your overall net worth that you're going to pass down is above $13 million, or if you're married, it's $26 million. So it's each individual person. So it's nice that gifts can be made. Even if you want to make a larger gift, it's fine. You just have to report it, but there's not necessarily taxes associated with it.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think there's a lot of unknowns or maybe misconceptions about exactly how that whole process works. And so, again, I would say having as part of a good estate plan and a good financial plan is having a good CPA or tax advisor to be able to walk you through those situations as well and really take care of you and your family.
Yeah, because in the situation where you do have an estate that's larger than 13 or 26 million, if you're married, there's a lot of planning that goes involved to minimizing estate taxes. And you can do a lot of planning, especially proactively. If you're young and you have a large balance sheet, you can do a lot of planning to minimize estate tax whenever you pass away. So have a great estate planning team, have a great tax planning team, and have a great financial advisor who's quarterbacking that whole conversation to make sure you do some great planning to minimize estate taxes. And kind of associated with that, I think we had a part about, some tips and tricks to be aware of. If someone's close to the end of their life, I think a common misconception is to kind of gift some assets out of their estate to the next generation so they can go ahead and have it. I would say exercise that with caution, because there is a current benefit when someone passes away and assets are moved from one person to the other. There is what's called a step up in basis. So what that means is if you own a stock, let's just use hypotheticals here. Let's say grandparent owned a stock, they bought it for their basis in it is $100,000. Let's say it's worth $1 million now, and they pass away. If they pass away, whoever inherits that stock, all of a sudden their basis gets stepped up to the fair market value on the date of death. So now your $1 million stock, if you turn around and sell it as soon as you inherit it and your basis is $1 million, there is zero capital gain there, therefore zero taxes. As opposed to if that stock is gifted, basis is transferred to the beneficiary of that gift. You inherit their basis, then you turn around and sell it while they're still alive or passed away. You've got a $900,000 gain in that scenario. So that, that goes with real estate or stock market investments, and that's all a hypothetical illustration. But that is one of the biggest things I think to be cautionary on is have some strategy around assets that are being passed from one generation to the other. And if someone is approaching the end of their life, be careful and seek advice before you make any big moves.
Yep, I think that's good. And I think when I maybe think about other mistakes that I've seen, I kind of hit on at the beginning, but it was just people not reviewing their plan. I mean, some of the worst things we've heard about is, somebody getting divorced and they have $1 million 401k at their employer and they get remarried and they forget to change the beneficiary on their 401k. And something happens and they pass away. Well, the ex-spouse is beneficiary. They're entitled to all that money, and there's not really a whole lot you can do about it, because that's how it was set up. So I think the biggest thing that we see is maybe just people not reviewing regularly, which is, I know, something that we said is something you need to do, but people just do it. They forget about it, because an estate plan encapsulates investments, properties, all that stuff. And so it's very easy to forget about something or just not update it because you got busy. And so being sure to review things regularly, I think, is another super important step in the whole process.
Always, always, always review beneficiaries. You have beneficiaries on 401ks, like Myles, like you just mentioned, life insurance policies, annuities, investment accounts, IRAs. Please, please, please review beneficiaries as often as you possibly can. Make sure they're still accurate. Big, life event happens between divorce, marriage, or you lose a loved one that was a beneficiary. Review it and change it ASAP. You want to make sure that your assets are going to flow to the people you want them to flow, because, like you mentioned, beneficiaries listed on an account, it's extremely difficult to get out of that situation. That ultimately rules. Right now, if you have a beneficiary on an IRA, that trumps what a will would say. So it's extremely important to make sure listed beneficiaries. And that's why part of our process, whenever we have client meetings, some planning and strategy sessions, we always review beneficiaries, just because it's of the utmost importance to get those right.
And I would add also, if for whatever reason you listen to this and you still don't want to go do something and you have somewhat sizable assets, write it down on a piece of paper and sign it and date it, because in the state of Tennessee, that's way better than nothing and has held up in courts on multiple occasions. And so at the very least, I think it's good to write it down and sign it and date it. And I would add, along with any good estate plan, even
get a witness.
You have all the
witness too.
yeah. Even you have all the documents done by an attorney. I think one other thing that just helps a family out when they're sorting through everything is if you still take the time to have some sort of letter written to go with the estate plan, just to make sure that the family's in the know and there's no confusion on anything, and it's kind of a nice little message for you to be able to leave your loved ones when you pass away.
Some sort of letter or video. Yeah, I think that's great. Just to add some character and personality to an estate plan, because it's just kind of a rigid legal document. I think that's a great thing to do. That's a great practice.
Yep, I'd agree there. Anything we missed?
Good deal. I think that's it. Looking to the list. So it's not the most exciting topic in the world to think about when it comes to planning for your death and life after your death and how stuff's going to flow and be handled, but nonetheless, extremely important. As we mentioned it a few times here, we have lots of great resources in the Nashville area, but also across the country, people that we've worked with to establish estate plans. So if there's anything we can do or help, and know that as we talk about this, we're not the experts. We can't give legal advice. So anything that we talk about is from what we've learned through these conversations and all the years of our study and experience. So, but for the ultimate advice, get with an estate planning attorney. When it comes to tax planning, get with the CPA. But let us be a part of that conversation if we can.
Yeah, and I would actually add a couple things here that I'm thinking of before we wrap up, and that's for anybody that you might pick to be, we call it the seats, if it's a guardian, executor, et cetera, always have that conversation with them ahead of time that, hey, I'm thinking about listing you as this in my estate plan, because it's great for them to get a heads up. They don't need to get a call when something happens to you and saying, hey, so-and-so listed you as the executor of their estate, or so-and-so listed you as the guardian of the kids. You don't want to be caught off guard in that situation. So I think one thing is always make sure to have that conversation with whoever you're putting in those seats. And the other thing is that this is, although it's not a fun task, like Carson said, this is something that's not hard to do. I mean, it's call it an hour-long meeting with a good estate attorney, walking you through this, you letting him know what your wishes are, where you want things, who you want to be in the estate plan. They go back, they complete all the documents. You come back in for another, let's call it an hour, and review the estate plan with them. And then you sign off on everything and get it all notarized. So we're talking a couple hours out of your life to get something like this in place. And so it's not something that's overcomplicated. You don't need to make it overcomplicated. It's not a ton of time that you have to really dedicate to this.
Yeah, it feels overwhelming making such big decisions, but also remember, these are decisions that hopefully aren't going to be factored in anytime soon. So yep. It's more important to get something done and know that later you can just always go back and change it if you're changing your mind.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Well, good deal. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us for another episode of Retire While You Work. We'll see you next week. Have a good one.
Have a great weekend.
Any opinions are those of myself and not necessarily those of Raymond James. Expressions of opinion are as of this date and are subject to change without notice. The information contained in these podcasts do not purport to be a complete description of the securities market or developments referred to in this material. The information has been obtained from sources considered to be reliable, but we do not guarantee that the foregoing material is accurate or complete. Every investor situation is unique, and you should consider your investment goals, risk tolerance, and time horizon before making any investment. Prior to making an investment decision, please consult with your financial advisor about your individual situation. Any hypothetical examples are for illustration purposes only. Actual investor results will vary. Raymond James does not provide legal or tax services. Please discuss these matters with the appropriate professional.